I received a USB from the dark web. It contains evidence of a crime I didn't commit. Hey everyone, this is my first time posting here, but I don't know where else to turn. I'm in a serious mess, and I need to get this out before something happens to me. So here's what happened. It all started about 2 weeks ago. I'm not proud of it, but I have a bit of a curiosity when it comes to the dark web. It's like a black hole that you know you shouldn't go near, but you can't help but be drawn to it. Usually, I just browse around, read some conspiracy theories, or buy weird little trinkets. Nothing major, you know? One night, I came across a forum thread about a guy selling exclusive USB drives. The post claimed they contained videos and pictures that were guaranteed to blow your mind. It was vague and kind of sketchy, but my curiosity got the better of me. I messaged the seller, and after a bit of haggling, I sent him $200 in Bitcoin. A week later, a small unmarked package arrived at my door. I was excited, like a kid on Christmas morning. I ripped open the package, and inside was a plain black USB drive. No markings, no branding. Just a USB. I rushed to my computer, plugged it in and opened the only folder on it, exposed. There were dozens of video files, all named with random strings of numbers and letters. I clicked on the first one. It was a grainy, shaky video of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. The camera panned around slowly, showing rusty machinery, broken windows, and debris scattered everywhere. The audio was just a low hum, like white noise. Then the camera focused on something in the corner. It was a chair, and there was a person tied to it. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman because their head was covered with a dirty sack. My heart started pounding as I watched. The person was struggling, trying to scream, but it was muffled by the sack. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the frame. They were wearing a black hoodie and a mask. The figure walked up to the person in the chair and pulled out a knife. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the masked figure began to cut into the person's arm. Blood poured out, and the muffled screams grew more frantic. I couldn't take it anymore and closed the video. I sat there, breathing heavily, trying to process what I had just seen. Part of me wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? That I bought a USB off the dark web and found a snuff film? They'd probably arrest me just for having it. I decided to take a break, get some fresh air. But when I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching me. I went back inside, locked all the doors, and decided to watch another video. Maybe it was just a sick prank, and the next video would be different. But it wasn't. Each video was worse than the last. Torture, murder, things I can't even describe without feeling sick. Then I found a video that made my blood run cold. It was my apartment. The camera was filming from outside, looking through my window. It was recent too. I recognized the shirt I was wearing. The camera zoomed in on me, sitting at my computer, watching the videos. My stomach dropped. Someone had been outside my apartment, filming me. I yanked the USB out of my computer and threw it across the room. I felt violated, exposed. Whoever had sent this to me knew where I lived, knew what I was doing. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every noise made me jump, every shadow looked like a person. The next morning, I decided to go to the police. I took the USB with me and tried to explain what had happened. They looked at me like I was crazy, but they took the USB and said they'd investigate. I went home, hoping that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. That night, I received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line just said, "We know." The email contained a single attachment, a photo of me, taken through my bedroom window, while I slept. I don't know what to do. I'm scared for my life. I don't know who these people are or what they want from me. I can't go to the police, and I can't stay here. If anyone has any advice, please, I'm begging you, help me. After that terrifying email, I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. I packed a bag with some essentials and checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The place was dingy, but at least I felt a bit safer. I needed to lay low and figure out my next move. I spent the first night in the motel staring at the ceiling, jumping at every creak and groan the old building made. By the time the sun came up, I hadn't slept a wink. I decided to try and piece together who could be behind this. The dark web seller was my first suspect, but how would they know my address? It didn't make sense. I went back to the police station, desperate for any update on their investigation. The officer I spoke to looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. He told me that they couldn't trace the USB back to anyone and suggested I might have been pranked by someone who knew me. They hadn't found anything useful on the USB itself, just the videos I described. Feeling hopeless, I returned to the motel. When I got back, I noticed something odd. The lock on my room door looked like it had been tampered with. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly pushed the door open. The room looked just as I had left it, but something felt off. I searched through my bag and found everything in order, except for my laptop. It was powered on, the screen showing a video file ready to play. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked play. The video started with a view of my motel room, from the same angle as the peephole in the door. Someone had been watching me. The camera zoomed in on me as I left the room earlier. Then, the camera moved, and I saw a gloved hand use a key to unlock the door. My blood ran cold as the person behind the camera entered the room and walked over to my bag, rummaging through it before placing the laptop on the table and starting the video recording. The video ended with the camera focusing on a note placed on the table. I looked around the room and found the note exactly where it had been in the video. It read, "You can't hide from us. We're always watching." My first instinct was to run, but where would I go? I couldn't live like this, always looking over my shoulder, never feeling safe. I needed to get some help. Someone who could actually do something. I thought about hiring a private investigator, someone who could look into this without the bureaucracy of the police. The next day, I met with a private investigator named Jack. He had a reputation for taking on difficult cases, and I hoped he could help me. I explained everything to him. From the USB to the emails and the video in my motel room. Jack listened carefully, taking notes and asking detailed questions. When I finished, he promised to look into it and get back to me as soon as he found anything. I spent the next few days in a state of constant anxiety. Jack kept in touch, but there were no leads. It seemed like whoever was behind this was always one step ahead. Then, one evening, I received another email from the anonymous address. This time, it was a video attachment. I opened it with trembling hands. The video was from a hidden camera in my motel room, showing me sitting on the bed, talking on the phone with Jack. The audio was clear, capturing every word of our conversation. My blood ran cold as I realized they had bugged my room. The camera angle shifted and I saw a figure standing outside my window, watching me. I felt a surge of fear and rage. I grabbed the curtains and yanked them open, but no one was there. My phone buzzed with a new message from Jack. It read, "Get out of there now, you're not safe." Without thinking, I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room. I jumped into my car and drove aimlessly, my mind racing. I ended up in another motel, even further out of town, and barricaded myself in the room. I texted Jack my new location, and he replied with a promise to send someone to keep an eye on me. That night, I barely slept, clutching a kitchen knife under the covers. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a person. I kept thinking about the videos, the emails, and the feeling of being watched. It was driving me insane. In the early hours of the morning, there was a knock at my door. I froze, gripping the knife tighter. The knock came again, louder this time. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. It was Jack. I let out a sigh of relief and opened the door, letting him in. Jack looked serious, more serious than I'd ever seen him. He told me that he'd found something. The seller of the USB drive was a known criminal, involved in blackmail and extortion. He believed they were trying to frame me for something, but he didn't know what. He warned me to stay hidden and keep in touch. As Jack left, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this. But that hope was shattered when I received another email, this time with a single image attached. It was a picture of my parents' house, taken from the front yard. The message read, "We know where they live, don't think you can run." My heart sank. I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. My family was in danger. I needed to end this once and for all. But how? I felt trapped, helpless, like a pawn in a game I didn't understand. And that's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to confront them. I knew confronting these people was a reckless idea, but I felt cornered. They knew where my family lived, and I couldn't let anything happen to them. Desperation makes you do stupid things. I decided to go back to the dark web, back to the forum where I had bought the USB. I created a new anonymous account and posted a message, asking to meet the seller in person. I made it sound like I had more money and wanted to buy more content. To my surprise, I received a reply within an hour. The message was short and direct. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street at midnight. Come alone." I spent the rest of the day in a haze of anxiety and fear, constantly looking over my shoulder. When the time came, I grabbed my knife and drove to the warehouse. It was the same one from the first video. The image of that rusty machinery and broken windows was burned into my mind. The place was even more intimidating in real life, shrouded in darkness, with only the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the area. I parked a few blocks away and walked to the warehouse, every step feeling heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, and my palms were sweaty as I gripped the knife in my pocket. I reached the entrance and pushed the creaky door open. The sound echoed through the empty space, making me jump. Inside, it was pitch black, except for a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling in the center of the room. Underneath it stood a man in a black hoodie and mask. He turned to face me as I approached, and I could see his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You must be the curious one," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "The one who couldn't leave well enough alone." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" He chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You made yourself an easy target. All that curiosity, poking around where you shouldn't. We decided to have a little fun." "Fun?" I spat, anger boiling inside me. "You call this fun? You're terrorizing me, stalking me, threatening my family." He stepped closer, and I could see the glint of a knife in his hand. "Oh, it's much more than that. You see, we needed someone like you. Someone with no connections, no one who would be missed. Someone we could frame." My mind raced, trying to understand. Frame me? For what? He didn't answer. Instead, he lunged at me, and I barely had time to react. I pulled out my knife and slashed wildly, catching him on the arm. He let out a grunt of pain but didn't stop. He tackled me to the ground, and we struggled, the knives flashing in the dim light. I managed to roll away and get to my feet, but he was quick, faster than I expected. He slashed at me, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. I staggered back, clutching the wound, blood seeping through my fingers. "You're in over your head," he said, advancing on me. "You should have stayed away." I felt dizzy, the pain making it hard to focus. But I couldn't give up. I thought about my family. About how they were in danger because of me. Summoning all my strength, I charged at him, knife raised. He was caught off guard, and I managed to stab him in the shoulder. He cried out and fell to the ground, dropping his knife. I stood over him, breathing heavily, blood dripping from my side. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Who's behind this?" He laughed, a harsh guttural sound. "You'll never know. This goes higher than you can imagine. You're just a pawn." Before I could respond, he pulled something from his pocket, a small device with a single button. He pressed it, and I heard a series of beeps. My heart sank as I realized what it was, a remote detonator. "You might have won this round," he said, his voice weakening. "But you won't make it out alive." Panic surged through me as I turned and ran, the beeping growing louder. I reached the door and threw it open, sprinting into the night. Behind me, the warehouse exploded in a deafening roar, the force of the blast knocking me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my body. I lay there, dazed, the world spinning around me. My ears rang, and I could barely move. Somehow, I managed to get to my feet and stumble to my car. I drove in a daze, not knowing where to go, just needing to get away. Eventually, I ended up back at Jack's office. He took one look at me and rushed me inside, calling for an ambulance. As I sat there, bleeding and exhausted, I tried to piece together what had just happened. Who were these people? Why had they chosen me? And what was their endgame? Jack stayed with me until the ambulance arrived, his face etched with concern. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he promised. "You're not alone in this fight." But as they loaded me into the ambulance, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whoever was behind this was still out there, watching, waiting. And they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. As the ambulance sped towards the hospital, I closed my eyes, praying that somehow we could end this nightmare. The next few days were a blur of hospital rooms, doctors, and painkillers. The explosion had left me with a few broken ribs and a nasty gash on my side, but I was lucky to be alive. Jack visited me every day, bringing updates on his investigation and reassuring me that he was getting closer to finding out who was behind all this. One afternoon, as I lay in my hospital bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, fearing the worst. The message read, "Nice try. We're not done with you yet." Attached was a video file. With trembling hands I played the video. It was footage from inside the hospital, showing Jack talking to a nurse at the front desk. The camera followed him as he walked down the hall towards my room. They were here. They knew exactly where I was. Panic set in, and I pressed the call button for the nurse. When she arrived, I told her everything, my words coming out in a frantic rush. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief but promised to inform the hospital security. Jack arrived a few hours later, looking more haggard than ever. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his usual confident demeanor was cracked. "We need to move you," he said quietly. "They've got people inside the hospital. It's not safe here." We concocted a plan to sneak me out. That night, under the cover of darkness, Jack and a couple of his trusted friends wheeled me out in a gurney, disguised as a deceased patient being transferred to the morgue. It was a morbid plan, but it worked. We got out without raising any alarms. Jack took me to a safe house, a small secluded cabin in the woods that belonged to a friend of his. It was far enough off the grid that we hoped it would take them a while to find me. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with enough supplies to last us a while. The next few days were tense but quiet. Jack stayed in constant contact with his team, trying to trace the anonymous messages and find any leads on the people behind this nightmare. Meanwhile, I tried to recover, both physically and mentally. The isolation of the cabin was both a blessing and a curse. It was peaceful, but the silence left too much room for my mind to wander. One evening, Jack and I were sitting by the fireplace, going over the case files. "I've been digging into the seller's background," Jack said, his voice low. "Turns out he's connected to a larger network of criminals. Blackmail, extortion, even human trafficking. They're using the dark web to find their victims, people they can manipulate or frame for their own ends." I shuddered at the thought. "So I was just unlucky? A random target?" Jack shook his head. "I don't think so. There's something more to this. They went to a lot of trouble to get to you. I think there's a reason they chose you specifically." I tried to recall anything that could have made me a target, but nothing made sense. I was just an ordinary guy, with an ordinary job and life. Why me? Just as we were about to call it a night, there was a loud crash from the kitchen. Both of us jumped to our feet, my heart racing. Jack grabbed his gun and motioned for me to stay put. He moved silently towards the kitchen, his gun raised. I strained to hear, my breath catching in my throat. There were muffled voices, the sound of a struggle and then a gunshot. I froze, fear gripping me. Jack reappeared a moment later, his face pale. "We need to go, now." He grabbed my arm and we rushed out the back door. We made it to the car and Jack peeled out of the driveway, the tires kicking up gravel. As we sped down the dark winding road, I glanced back and saw figures emerging from the shadows of the cabin. "Who were they?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Professionals," Jack replied grimly. "They knew exactly where to find us. Someone tipped them off." We drove for hours, the tension between us palpable. Jack's phone buzzed with constant updates from his team. They had intercepted some communications indicating that the people after us were part of a larger syndicate. Whoever they were, they had resources and reached far beyond anything we had anticipated. We ended up in another safe house, this one a rundown apartment in a less savory part of town. It wasn't ideal, but it was anonymous. Jack's team had managed to secure a few more pieces of the puzzle. The cellar, the videos, the emails. It was all part of a coordinated effort to frame me for a series of crimes, including the murder of the man in the warehouse. As we settled into the apartment, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. I was being hunted, framed for crimes I didn't commit, and now my family was in danger. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game with no rules and no way to win. Jack tried to reassure me, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We were up against a powerful enemy and our options were running out. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The shadowy figures closing in on us were relentless. And I knew that if we didn't find a way to stop them, they would destroy everything I cared about. I didn't sleep at all, haunted by the faces of the people in the videos, the cold calculating voice of the man in the warehouse, and the constant fear that any moment could be my last. The next morning, Jack received a call that seemed to change everything. One of his contacts had managed to trace the source of the anonymous emails. They led back to a secure server linked to a known crime syndicate with ties to government officials and high-profile criminals. This was bigger than we ever imagined. We knew we had to act fast. Jack and I decided to take the fight to them. We couldn't keep running. It was time to confront the people behind this nightmare. We gathered what little information we had and prepared for what felt like a suicide mission. The location of the server was in an abandoned office building downtown. It was heavily guarded, but we had no choice. If we could access the server, we might find the evidence needed to clear my name and bring these bastards down. We arrived at the building just after midnight, armed with guns and a determination to end this once and for all. The streets were eerily quiet, the city's usual hum replaced by an oppressive silence. Jack led the way, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. As we approached the building, We spotted 2 guards at the entrance. Jack took one out with a silenced shot, and I managed to knock the other unconscious. We dragged their bodies into the shadows and moved inside. The building was dark and empty, a labyrinth of corridors and offices. We navigated through it, our footsteps echoing in the silence. My heart pounded in my chest, every shadow seeming to move, every creak making me jump. We reached the server room on the top floor. It was secured with a heavy steel door. Jack worked quickly to bypass the security system, his fingers flying over the keypad. Finally, the door clicked open, and we stepped inside. The room was filled with racks of servers, their lights blinking in the darkness. Jack plugged a USB drive into the main console and started downloading the files. As the progress bar inched forward, I kept watch, my nerves on edge. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. I turned to see a group of armed men approaching. "Jack, we've got company," I shouted. He cursed under his breath and quickened his pace. Just a few more seconds. The men stormed into the room, guns raised. A firefight erupted, bullets flying and sparks flashing. I fired back, taking cover behind a server rack. Jack finished the download and pulled the USB drive free, shoving it into his pocket. "We need to get out of here," he yelled. We fought our way out, the corridors now a battleground. I was running on pure adrenaline, my wounds forgotten in the chaos. We reached the stairwell and dashed down, bullets whizzing past us. My mind was a blur, focused only on survival. We burst out of the building into the night, but our escape was cut short by a black SUV skidding to a halt in front of us. Men in black suits jumped out, guns aimed at us. We were surrounded. A tall man stepped forward, his face hidden in the shadows. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "Hand over the drive." Jack and I exchanged a glance. We were outgunned and outnumbered, but we couldn't let them win. Jack slowly reached into his pocket, then suddenly threw the drive towards me. "Run!" he shouted. I caught the drive and bolted, the men firing after me. Jack tackled one of them, giving me a precious few seconds. I sprinted down the alley, my legs burning, my lungs on fire. I had no plan, no destination, just a single thought. Survive. I ran for what felt like hours, my pursuers close behind. I ducked into a narrow alley, then another, trying to lose them in the maze of the city. Eventually, I found a hiding spot behind a dumpster, my breath ragged, my body trembling. I stayed there, hidden in the filth and darkness, until the sounds of pursuit faded. I didn't know what had happened to Jack. If he was alive or dead. All I had was the drive, and the hope that it contained the key to ending this nightmare. When I was sure it was safe, I made my way to a public library. Using their computers to access the files on the drive. It was a treasure trove of information, names, dates, transactions, everything linking the syndicate to high-profile crimes and corrupt officials. Enough to bring them down, if I could get it to the right people. I sent the files to every news outlet, every law enforcement agency I could think of. I included my story, my evidence, everything I had been through. Then I destroyed the drive and fled, hoping I had done enough. The next few days were a whirlwind of news reports and police raids. The syndicate was exposed, their leaders arrested, their operations dismantled. My name was cleared, but the scars remained. I never saw Jack again. I like to think he made it out, that he's still out there, fighting the good fight. As for me, I've started a new life, far away from the city, far from the shadows that haunted me. But every night I lock my doors and check my windows, the memory of those dark days lingering in the back of my mind. I've learned to live with the fear, the paranoia, because I know they're still out there, watching, waiting. And I'll never let my guard down again.